Hi everyone, my name is Leanne and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I'm thinking about reading over this spooky season. Spooky season is definitely coming and I would certainly like to theme some of my reading over September and October to appropriately fit the spooky season. It certainly won't be all of my reading. I will be reading not spooky stuff in amongst the mix of that, and I don't think I'm going to read all of the books that I'm going to be talking about today, but I'll definitely read some of them, and here's a selection of what I'm thinking about reading for the season. So firstly, I have 3 novels for adult readers, starting with The Shadow Cabinet by Juno Dawson. I have the gorgeous Waterstone special edition that has these incredible pink sprayed edges. So this is the second book in Juno Dawson's witchy series for adults. So the first book was Her Majesty's Royal Coven. I read that around this time last year and thought it was absolutely fantastic. It's this kind of modern witchy society, and it's very difficult to talk about the second book in the series without spoiling the first one, particularly when there's such a big twist at the end of the first book that really changes the trajectory of where you think the series is going to go and what characters you're going to be spending time with in this second book. But I can definitely say that the first book was really exciting, really page turning. The way the witches' coven was kind of crafted and set up, and all the kind of different dynamics between witches in this coven was done so fantastically and really compellingly, and it was really interesting to see the different motivations of different characters. Much of that first book is focused on what happens when there is a trans witch in that coven, and how some people are really supportive of that, but it causes a divide within the coven because some people are very wary of someone who they see as being a warlock, not a witch, having a role in the witches' coven. I'm very intrigued to see where the story is taken in this second book. I think it's one that I might be tempted to listen to on audio because it's read by Nicola Coughlan, who you may know from Derry Girls and Bridgerton. She was recently in the Barbie movie, but I really love her, so I think listening to her narrate this novel would be really fun. Another witchy book that is on my TBR is The Women Could Fly by Megan Giddings. So this is another book that is set in a world where witches are real. It's also set in a world where the state mandates that all women be married by the age of 30, and the clock is ticking for our main character, Jo, who is 28. Jo is also a mixed race woman, and she bears the stigma of having a mother who disappeared when she was a child, and there are a lot of accusations that her mother was a witch. Our main character is also bisexual, so there's prejudice that she faces because of that as well. So this is another book that is very much using that historical treatment of women who were suspected as witches to kind of convey modern prejudice as well. I think I might have to have like a little bit of separation between reading The Shadow Cabinet and reading this, because I think they do hit on some similar themes, although they look at women with very different experiences. But I just want to give both of those books the time to really have like a place to shine in my reading. So this next book doesn't have like a supernatural element to it, but it is a thriller, and I don't read lots of thrillers, so I think this holds a place on my spooky season TBR, and that is Death of a Bookseller by Alice Slater. So I really enjoy like Alice Slater on Twitter and her podcast and stuff. So when I heard she was bringing this book out, which has a lot of kind of inspiration from her time as a bookseller, I was really excited to read this and pre-ordered it. So I don't know why I haven't read this yet. We are following 2 booksellers. One of them is Roach, who is a bit of a loner. They are really into true crime, and they don't really have like any interest in making friends, particularly with like their other booksellers. That is until Laura joins the bookshop, and Laura is very much like a stereotypical bookshop girly. She's very sunny. She has got her cute literary tote bags, and Roach becomes really interested in Laura and senses this kind of darkness within her, and I think it just kind of gets darker and darker as the book goes on, very much tapping into people's like fascination with true crime. Feels quite different to a lot of the stuff I normally read, so I think it will really stand out amongst my reading this year. Next, I have 2 books that I kind of want to read like in tandem with each other. So I'd really like to read Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. I don't feel like I really need to talk about like the plot of this book so much, because I think it's one of those stories that has just kind of been absorbed into public consciousness. But I think obviously like a lot of the characters from Peter Pan are really associated like with Halloween, like me and my housemates dressed up as I was Tinkerbell, and my housemates were Peter Pan and Wendy and Captain Hook last year, very much inspired by kind of like the Disney-fied version of this story. And I do think that this original story from J.M. Barrie is quite different. There's a lot more kind of darkness to it, and I have also heard that there are elements of this that are very much like of its time in terms of its depiction of race, and there is just like straight up racist elements to this book, so I definitely want to like go at it with a critical lens. Like, I'm not expecting it to be like a super fun Disney read, but because of that I wanted to pair it with something that was taking the kind of the fun elements of that original story and doing something more modern with them, and something that I find more kind of inclusive. So I am going to read Lost in the Neverwoods by Aiden Thomas. So I have read one Aiden Thomas book before, The Cemetery Boys, and I really loved it. It was quite different to what I normally read, so it was such a pleasant surprise that I loved it as much as I did, but it made me really keen to read more from this author, and this is a Peter Pan inspired book. So 5 years previous to this book, Wendy and her two brothers disappeared into the forest, and she was the only one that returned. Now children are starting to disappear, and everyone is coming to Wendy in search of answers. Wendy really wants to flee from this element of her life, but it is then that she meets Peter, a boy that she thought only existed in her imagination. And Peter is begging for Wendy's help in order to rescue the lost children. So as I said, this is a Peter Pan inspired book. Based on what I know about Aiden Thomas and his previous book, I do think this is going to be a lot more kind of inclusive of people of color and also queer experiences. So I'm really pleased that I'm intending to read this like straight after I read Peter Pan. Next on my might be read list for the spooky season is Angela Carter's book of fairy tales. So I've read a little bit of Angela Carter before. I have read her whole short story collection, The Bloody Chamber, and really liked those stories. It was quite a while ago that I read them. I read them in my first year of university, but they've really stayed with me. And I've read a couple of books from her since, but nothing that I have enjoyed as much as that short story collection. And this is a book of fairy tales from her. I'm not sure if there's any overlap between the contents of this and The Bloody Chamber in other stories. There may well be, so some of these stories I may have read before. But this is just such a gorgeous book. Like, isn't she beautiful? This was gifted to me by my amazing friend Anna. And I don't think, even if I get around to reading this in the spooky season, I don't think I'm going to read it like cover to cover. I think I'm going to like dip in and out of it because I think there's a lot of short stories in this. So it may be something that I read some of these stories this spooky season and then I kind of finish it off like in a year's time. Like, that's kind of what I think I'm going to do with this book, but who knows. What I've read from Angela Carter before has been deliciously dark, has like really feminist, kind of edgy gothic twists to fairy tales, and definitely strays into the strange and the bizarre. So I think it'll be a bit mixed how I get on with this. Another collection of spooky stories that I may dip into is Ghost Stories by M.R. James. I don't know anything about this author. I've not read any of their work before, but I do think these stories are very kind of like traditional English Gothic tales. I don't read a lot of short stories, so I feel like I will probably pick one or the other. Like, I will probably dip into Angela Carter's stories or M.R. James's stories. It may well be that I dip into both of them and then finish them both in a year's time. I don't know, but this is definitely on my maybe pile for the spooky season. And finally, I have a poetry collection. So I have Poems Bewitched and Haunted. These are selected and edited by John Hollander. It is in this gorgeous Halloweeny package. This is definitely one that I'm going to be reading. It's probably read it actually like on Halloween, but it's a collection of like spooky Halloween poems. I feel like that's pretty much, you know, self-explanatory. So that is it. They are my list of possibilities for spooky season reading. Are you someone that likes to theme your reading around the season, or is it something that you completely read by whim? Have you read any of these? Do you think I'm gonna like them? Is there anything that is on your radar to read for the spooky season? I would love to know. And if you want to let me know you're here but you don't have anything in particular to say, leave me the pumpkin emoji so I know that you're here. If you want to connect with me elsewhere, all of my social media is always linked down below in the description. I hope you guys are doing well, and I'll speak to you in my next video.